begin.
As a reminder, this meeting will be recorded. Please limit use of the chat as those comments are not visible to the public, and we do not want a conversation going on separate from what is verbalized in the meeting. If you get disconnected or have tech issues, please use the dial-in feature. With that, the clerk will begin the meeting once the recording begins. The regular meeting of the Capital Long Range Improvement Committee will now begin.
Good afternoon. My name is Jeffrey Strand. I'm the chair of the Capital Long Range Improvement Committee. Before we begin, I'd like to note that this meeting includes the remote participation of members as authorized under Minnesota statute section 13D.021 due to the declared local health pandemic. I will now call this meeting to order and ask the clerk to call the roll so that we may verify the presence of a quorum.
Thor Adam.
Present.
Zachariah Aiden.
Present.
Jonathan On.
Present.
Beard. John Bernstein.
Here.
Vice Chair Willie Bridges.
Present.
James Brown.
Present.
Scott Eagle. Amity Foster.
Here.
Yamon Gallagher.
Present.
William Graves.
Present.
Gumudstad. Lisa Hustad.
Present.
Jones.
Here.
Inca.
Here.
LaRoe.
Here.
Connell.
Here.
Dan Miller.
Here.
Todd Schumann.
Here.
Chair Strand.
Present.
Katrina Stratton.
Present.
Beth Toso.
Present.
Present.
20 total present.
Very good. Do we have a quorum? Thank you. With that, we'll proceed to our agenda and minutes, a copy of which was posted for public access to the city's legislative information management system, which is available at lims.minneapolismn.gov. And in order to expedite, I would entertain a motion to approve the agenda and accept the minutes of April 6, 2022. When members make a motion or the second motion, please state your name following so the clerk may record that. Is there a motion to adopt the agenda and minutes?
So move. Willie Bridges.
Second, Eric Wan.
We have a motion and a second. Is there any discussion or amendments to the agenda and minutes as published? Which will include the roll call, adoption of the agenda, acceptance of minutes of April 6th, capital budget request Q&A for Art in Public Places, Minneapolis Park and Rec Board, and then followed by task force breakout sessions and adjournment, noting that I have a conflict at 1 p.m., so Vice Chair Bridges will manage the meeting at that point. Is there any discussion? I'm not seeing anything, so in that case, the clerk will call a roll on adoption.
Thor Adam.
Aye.
Zachariah Aiden. Jonathan On.
Aye.
Jocelyn Beard.
Aye.
John Bernstein.
Aye.
Vice Chair Willie Bridges.
Aye.
James Brown.
Aye.
Foster. Yaman Gallagher,
Aye.
Liam Graves,
Aye.
Micah Munstad, Munstad,
Aye.
Katie Jones,
Aye.
Matt Kazinka,
Aye.
Richard LaRoe,
Aye.
Dan McConnell,
Aye.
Miller, Dan Miller,
Aye.
Todd Schumann,
Aye.
Chair Jeff Strand,
I vote aye.
Tina Stratton,
Aye.
Toso,
Aye.
Juan,
Aye.
20 ayes.
This is Scott Engel. I'm here now, and I vote aye.
Thank you. Uh, 21 ayes.
21 ayes, clerk. Thank you. So the agenda is approved. The minutes are accepted from April 6th, and we can move on to our meeting. So just a reminder that the city staff sent out a reminder for the Q&A session in terms of process guidance. And then also that back on April 11th, members were sent the notice about the ethics training. So there was a link provided to check the status of your ethics training. And the homepage to Public Works presentations and CBRs was updated. So as we get into the presentations for the capital budget request, I would suggest for allowing the presenters some flexibility for their opening remarks and their initial presentation, after which members should just raise hand function to be recognized for questions. Dan Miller in the lobby. He'll be admitted. So that's how the process has worked well in the past, at least to wait for each CBR to be presented and then have questions. So with that, are we ready for art in public places? Is that Mary?
Good morning, Mr. Chair, members of the Capital Long Range Improvement Committee. I'm Mary Altman. I am the supervisor, the public arts supervisor, and for community planning and economic development. We've submitted 2 CBRs to you, which is unusual. The first CBR, Art01, has been submitted for many decades in one form or another to the Capital Long Range Improvement Committee for an annual dedication of the net debt bond to public art, permanent public art projects. And then the second one is for a special project for public art for the Upper Harbor Terminal. CPED felt that this is such a large project, you know, many 40, almost 50 acres. You know, we are really creating an entirely new place in the city, in an area of the city where we have traditionally underinvested. And so we felt that it was really important for this project, not unlike Nicollet Mall or the new public service building, to have its own significant public art budget. And so those are the 2 projects before you today. I'd also like to share that community engagement is a really important part of the process for us on these projects. You know, we're developing pieces that will be in the community for generations, and engaging the community and engaging each community in the way they need to be engaged is really important to us. And so we tailor community engagement to every single project. And I gave some examples in both the proposal and in the presentation, but I'm happy to talk more about that too. I'd also just like to add that, we have not been perfect over the years in community engagement, and we are not perfect now. We're continuing to learn and grow all the time, but I am pretty proud of where we're at to date, although I do continue to look forward to learning more and more from the community about the best way to approach working with community. So thank you for the opportunity to answer questions today.
Vice Chair Bridges can help. Here's John. I see John Bernstein, hand raised.
Yeah, thank you. I just want to clarify something on the CBR for ARTO 1. At the top of that form, it says that the outstanding bond unused remaining bond authorizations are 862,000 and change, which is basically the amount that was allocated for 2022. But at the bottom of that CBR, you have a chart that shows a bunch of projects that are underway.
Yeah,
and that totals $3.4 million in remaining authorizations.
Yeah, that's a mistake, isn't it?
Well,
the chart is accurate. The chart is accurate.
Okay.
Yeah, that's a mistake. I apologize for that.
I just wanted to clarify the information. So then just a quick question on that same topic. So looking at that chart, so one of the things we're trying to do is try to make sure that the money that's authorized matches the timing of when it's going to get used, and there aren't authorizations sitting around for a long time that are taking up capacity. And that's separate and distinct from, it's not about trying to take money away from art in public places or any other projects out there. So, I'll just pick one on here. Upper Harbor Terminal. It says plan completion is 2025 and it's $300,000. Is that slowly going out each year between now and then? Is it possible that we could wait to authorize some of that until we get closer to 2025?
So, so a couple of ways I'm going to answer that question. One is that we do spend the money over a number of years. Each project from beginning to end, the timeline for it is approximately 3 years, but it's also dependent on the infrastructure project that we're connected to, right?
Right.
So each project's timeline is really individual, and so it is. So it does take several years to spend the bonds, and I recognize we're actually sitting on a lot of bonds right now. The other thing is that you are not in ARTO 1, you are not authorizing individual projects like Upper Harbor. You authorize ARTO 1 and you fund it every year according to the ordinance, and then the Minneapolis Arts Commission selects the projects. And so I don't know how to answer the second part of your question, because I don't know how that would work according to the policy and the process that both finance and CPAD are implementing in terms of funding art projects. You know what I mean?
I do.
I don't know if you have the authority to go back and change how an individual project is funded when you're not funding you don't select North Commons Park, for example.
Right, and I'm not suggesting that we're going to go into that level of detail. It's more about understanding. And also, just we have a lot of new people on the committee. You've explained over many years that part of this is just the nature of these kind of projects. They take a while to complete, and as you just pointed out, there's some things that are beyond your control, where as it relates to other infrastructure that needs to be in place before you can do certain things.
Right.
So I'm just suggesting that maybe finance and you think about a better feedback loop, so we could try to not have a larger than necessary amount outstanding. That's all.
And we are, to be honest, we're catching up, but we are pretty behind because we ended up with 17 new projects as part of the new public service building that were outside of our work plan. And so over the last 2 years, our workload has been enormous. You know, we are normally managing like about 9 or 10 projects a year. And over the last 3 years, we've been managing 3 times that. And so we're playing catch up, but we've contracted with some additional project managers, and we're trying to get these projects out the door.
Let's ask finance if they have any clarity for the issue. So am I understanding the question was putting things into the 6-year capital improvement program versus my understanding has always been the council and mayor actually approve the appropriation for the next year. But did finance have any comment on this last discussion, just to clarify for members?
So if it's for the, I guess for ART01, the amount is determined. It's 1.5% of total net debt bond amount. So like the future year dollar amounts are just planned and like what was adopted as part of the whole picture of last year. But this number does adjust throughout the year when we're moving into the next year. Yeah. So
Thanks,
I don't know a better answer than that, but.
Thanks, Neil. Then let's go to Eric Wan next.
Is Eric speaking?
Not hearing if he is.
Yes, sorry. I'd like to begin by thanking Mary for years and years of dedicated work to bring such great art to the city. I've been on some of your tours and really enjoy seeing what's there. My question is specific to the Upper Harbor Terminal. So that's an interesting situation where the park board has a large segment of property there, and they've engaged with Juxtaposition Arts as their consultant. For art. They've been doing public outreach to gather the public's sentiments about what art looks like there. And you mentioned something earlier regarding a long-term type of art, which is a little different from what Juxtaposition was talking about, in that they're talking about art that changes over time. In other words, it adapts to the changes in society and our cultural tastes. So the first question is, are you going to be working with the park board on developing this plan for art in the Upper Harbor Terminal? And the second question is, oftentimes developers will provide set-asides, and I believe it's mandated in some cases, in many cases, that a certain amount be set aside for art. Is that included in your planning for the Upper Harbor Terminal? And have the developers committed to providing funding for public art in that development area?
Thank you for your questions. They're really good questions. So first of all, both Public Works and the Park Board had Juxta on their team. And yes, we would be working with, if this is funded, we would be working with both Public Works and the Park Board to implement projects into their capital improvement projects at the Upper Harbor. In terms of the percent for private development, there is no mandate. There are what are called FAR bonuses for developers that kick in sometimes for public art. My understanding of those is not really complex. I'm not a zoning administrator, but I believe that the FAR bonuses would likely not kick in on this site, just because it's about density, and I don't think we're building at the density where those would kick in. But also, sometimes we encourage developers, and I think in this case the developer is very interested in integrating public art. And one of our hopes or thoughts is that if we're investing in public art in the public realms and in the park, that the developer will be encouraged to kind of carry that into their own work and to build on the planning and community engagement that we've been doing. And so there's not a requirement, but we do hope that the developer will do that. Did I answer all your questions?
Yes, Mr. Chair.
The temporary or the more transient kind of design or change in design question.
Yeah, if Mr. Chair, if I could follow up on the last
Follow
question.
up, yes.
Okay, there is a community benefits agreement that is in development, and that's where I would recommend the city requests that the developers include funding for public art before the community benefits agreement is signed and delivered. So we can explore that later.
Yes, and I can talk to Eric Hansen about that.
Okay, thank you very much, Mary.
But just in terms of the ability to do more temporary pieces that change over time, because this is generally funded through the net debt bond, we have to have a longer lifespan, and so we are unable to do shorter term pieces. That doesn't mean that the park board can't fund those through its programming dollars, as the park develops. We also, artists sometimes are capable of designing permanent pieces that have some ability to change in terms of what they look like during different times of day. The incorporation of lighting is sometimes able to create kind of a changing element. Also, artworks weather differently. And, one of the things that public artists really are challenged to do, is to really think about the long term, how people will experience the piece in the long term. And when people created work for the new building, we said, remember what the audience is going to look like in 25 years for this project. And we would definitely do that for Upper Harbor too, because it is a community that, first of all, we're inventing a community in many ways, or inventing a place. And so, people will move into the Upper Harbor and visit the Upper Harbor over time, and we have to really be sensitive to some of those aspects of the piece and how it relates to time.
Great, thank you.
Thanks. Next, managing the stack will go to Katie Jones, then Dan Miller, and then back to John Bernstein.
Yes, thank you. I had to step away for a second, so I apologize if this is a redundant question. But to clarify, you say in the project description that Art 02 is beyond the ordinance required 1.5%, essentially mandate for art investment, correct?
Correct.
Okay, can you talk a little bit more about why you see, like you mentioned that constrained budgets, things like that. Can you explain why there's the necessity for the secondary, essentially secondary project?
Sure. Well, first of all, so for example, Art 01 funds the entire city. Upper Harbor has been submitted the last few years to the Public Art Advisory Panel and the Arts Commission. Then Upper Harbor is competing with projects across the city. It's unlikely that we could make a major investment that the Arts Commission or the Public Art Advisory Panel would say, we'd like to invest like 3 years of the public art budget in this one area of the city. So, but I think we feel strongly that this site deserves major investment, just like Nicollet Mall deserved a major investment, just like the new building deserved a major investment. This site deserves a major investment, and this site is a blight on the North Side community and has been for many years. And this is really an opportunity to right that wrong, and to also right generations and generations of racism and structural racism in this community and environmental racism. And so we believe the city should make a major investment there to create a new place that represents the communities that have been discriminated against for so long.
If I can ask a quick follow-up question. So can you confirm that there's a precedent has been set that for Nicollet Mall and what was the other one? The new public service center, that there were separate budgets, projects?
Both of those projects had separate budgets, and both of those budgets were $2 million, which is what we're asking for here.
And those were part of the capital improvement program?
The new building was part of the capital improvement program, but not funded through CLIC. And Nicollet Mall was part of the capital improvement program. Like many other projects in the capital improvement program, it had multiple sources of revenue.
Thank you.
Dan Miller was next if he's still waiting, and then John. Dan Miller and then John.
Yes, hello, can you hear me? Okay, thank you. Thank you for your presentation, Mary. My question is about ARC 02 and the Upper Harbor Terminal. And I was wondering if there are some plans about the 94 overpass, about softening that exterior or softening that length.
I'm smiling, laughing, because I'm working with MnDOT on a number of projects right now, and it's like the most painful part of my job to get art on MnDOT property. Nearly impossible. I've had permits in the queue with MnDOT for years. I'm not giving up. But the city collaborates a lot with MnDOT, but their art policy in particular is really horrendous, and many people at MnDOT would admit that. For example, they ask artists to sign away all of their rights. Yeah, so I think the 94 overpass is an opportunity. I can't overpromise on that because right now I'm working with MnDOT on 3 projects, and one of them I've had a permit out on for like 5 years, and another one I've been working with them on for a couple of years, and it's very, very difficult to do. Oh, you're muted.
Thank you. I mentioned that partly because it was one of our comments on page 16 of the last year's CLIC report about collaborating between paving projects and Art 101, or in this case, Art 102. And part of that was just a little pitch that 94, of course, poses a lot of the same problems as Rondo does in St. Paul, and all up and down it. And 26th Avenue did a wonderful job getting some artwork connecting Farview Park to Theodore Park, but nothing from Farview Park to the river, which now has the new river overlook. And when that project was done, I think they faced some of the same issues of MnDOT, but it'll be certainly nice to see what we can learn on the Upper Harbor, if it could be applied to soften that awful, horrendous overpass as well.
Also, one of the 3 permits that I'm working with on is the Wilson Bridge spanning 94. I've been working on that for many years. I think we are getting close to an agreement with MnDOT, and a huge part of that work is already fabricated. I'm hoping to install it this fall, but I am again running into hurdles with reviews from MnDOT. So,
thank you. Just in closing, in 2023, the Parks Board will be connecting the river overlook to Ole Sabo, south to West River Road. So there'll be, again, a very nice connection there, and it'd be great to bring people up 26. So thank you.
Thank you. That would be an exciting project.
Great. John Bernstein.
Thanks. I just wanted to clarify one thing and then ask a second question. I'll give them both to you and then let you answer. You mentioned that $2 million was spent on Nicollet Mall and on the new office building downtown. I'm wondering if there was any other input you used to arrive at that $2 million figure for Upper Harbor. That's question one. And the second question is, I've been on the committee since '07, and I don't recall a separate art project coming through in that period of time. So I'm not sure if you're referring to the most recent renovation of Nicollet Mall or one that predates '07. And then I'll just hedge that whole thing by saying at my age, I'm happy if I remember what I have for breakfast. So it's entirely possible. I'm not.
So it wasn't a separate proposal for art for either of those two projects. The art budget came out of the infrastructure project in Nicollet Mall and the infrastructure project for the new building. Both of those projects had pretty generous infrastructure budgets and were able to do that. I think that staff feel that the Upper Harbor infrastructure and park board budgets are strapped and don't have the capacity to fund public art on their own, and that's why we're coming to you with a separate request. I think the $2 million figure for me is really related to the amount of physical space. And also in thinking, I make comparisons to what Say2 Jones did in Heritage Park. And I don't actually know how much Say2's work cost in Heritage Park because so much of it was actually in the bid package for the infrastructure. So, but if I was going to say what it would cost us to do what we did in Heritage Park today, I would estimate that would be about $2 million in investment. And so given the amount of acreage and kind of what it would look like to do multiple works to really help create a place in Upper Harbor, I think that's what would be required.
Thank you.
All right, I see Dan Miller up. Is that hand left up or are you going for number 2?
Sorry, I'm trying to lower it.
Okay, well, don't want to discourage questions, but if we do not have, then if Mary has a concluding summary, and then I know have quite a number of park board presentations, so.
Oh, so I wasn't prepared for a concluding summary, but
Okay.
I would like to, first of all, I have so much appreciation for the work that Click does. This is an enormous amount of work. I review these CBRs on a regular basis looking for art opportunities, and I just know how much paperwork and how many presentations you're going through. And I personally just really appreciate the work you're doing for the city. But I do hope that in particular you will consider this special request this year to fund 2 projects. I don't have an intention to do this on a regular basis. But I do feel that Upper Harbor is a really significant project for the city and a significant project for North. And I hope you will consider funding Art 02. So thank you again for your time today.
Thank you, Mary. I see Amelia Kruver has a point, but thank you, Mary, for presenting.
Thank you so much, Jeff. And Mary, I just wanted to chime in to say thank you so much for all the work that you've done. I know that my staff have given a lot more feedback this year as we try to implement some process improvements and bring some things like a racial equity lens more sharply into the capital project. You've been just a joy to work with, and we appreciate your working with us on that.
Oh, thank you so much. Have a great day, everyone.
Thank you. All right, are we ready to transition to Minneapolis Park and Recreation Board?
I'm ready, Chair Strand.
Great.
I see a hand, though.
Oh, Amelia? Okay, let's go with Adam. Welcome. And like I said on the other, probably overview, initial high points presentation, and then if you're doing individual projects, we try to break for questions after each project presentation. or group?
Sure. Chair Strand and Click members, thanks for the opportunity to talk to you today. I will admit to operating a little bit under perhaps the pretense of last year, where the presentation that I provided by video in advance, and then obviously the CVRs go into some detail on that. So I'm not going to represent all of that to you today in order that there's a lot more time for the Q&A, which is what I understood this to be. I will say, though, to preface the Park Board's request overall, is that there's a couple of differences from previous years. We actually are submitting a larger number of individual projects this year. There are 22 projects that have come before you. And as in years past, there is a mix of projects that are happening in a single park, and then also projects that are more of our ongoing programs. And we also do have one special assessment bond project that has to do with forestry. Of those ongoing projects that we do, 2 of them are really the largest requests. One of those is the Rehabilitation Program, which essentially fixes park amenities across our system and is part of the 20-year Neighborhood Parks and Streets Program, or NPP 20, as you'll see it referred to in the Park Board documentation. And the other, that's Park RP. Park CP is the project that captures capital improvements in parks at smaller dollar amounts. The reason why there are more projects this year, specifically more single park projects this year, there are 16 of those. There are 2 reasons for it. Number one is that the amount of the NPP 20 agreement between the city and the Park Board did increase before last year's CIP adoption. So the Park Board is requesting more funds than it has in the past under that revised agreement with the city. And those funds are escalating year over year. So instead of the previously locked in 10.5 million in bonds, those numbers do increase year over year. So more money means more projects. We also did take the step this year to lower the dollar amount threshold for a project becoming a standalone park project, rather than being subsumed into the Park CP project, down to a straight $1 million. So there are actually projects that were in that global Park CP last year, which are now standalone projects. This again gives the opportunity for you to see them in more detail individually as a standalone. And I know that's been a consistent request of Click in the past. So some projects had their budgets increased, which created single park projects, and then also lowering that threshold created a few more. So that's why there are more of them. And again, just the only other note that I'd make before turning it back over to you, Chair Strand, for questions, is that I was really thrilled this year to see the new racial equity questions, and also in addition, some of the very specific longevity and facility quality questions. Since the inception of NPP 20, the Park Board has been using a set of equity metrics, empirical data-driven equity metrics, to build its own CIP. That's required under the NPP 20 ordinance. And actually, it was good to, as I think you saw in the CBRs, we were able to provide quite a lot of detail on longevity of specific facilities, as well as quality, as well as equity scoring under the racial equity metric. So I was proud to show that off. I'm glad to see that that there's a lot of interest among Click in having some of those specific questions. And I'm happy to dig in deeper on any specifics if you want to. But with that, I think Chair Strand, I'd like to, I want to thank the committee, obviously, for your service. I'd like to turn that back over to you and let the members here today kind of drive where the conversation goes next.
Thank you, Adam. It's a pleasure. And I know the Park Board always does excellent detailed presentations. So I'll take point of personal privilege here to just say that with Shingle Creek Park coming in, As it happens, when I had moved from South Minneapolis to North Minneapolis, that was one of the very first projects as a neighborhood organization person circa 1992 that I got involved with, was completing, I would call it an equity project, for making the park trail connection between Hennepin County and Minneapolis Park and Rec Board. About 600 yards of wood chip trail was paved so that people living and experiencing disabilities could utilize that connection. So that was one of the very first things, working with your predecessors and through Shingle Creek Neighborhood Association, to get that accomplished. That really reinforced the value of citizen engagement with me. So we will go to Amity and then John.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Hi, Adam. I'm the one of the Ward 3 reps on CLIC. So I have a question under let me make sure I get the right number, PRK 02. So under the racial equity impact analysis, sorry, I'm scrolling up and down. What data is available or missing, and how can you obtain additional data? What do you have? So you say our primary way of better understanding park user demographics is to perform robust community engagement, etc. Do you have an example or a plan to collect better demographics?
Yeah, Amity, thank you for that question. Park user data, who walks into the park and plays in the wading pool or plays on the playground, I think is one of the biggest data gaps in our system. So in the regional park system, which the park board also manages, we have a system of sending people out into those parks every summer to do visit counts. And that's required in order to get Met Council funding for those parks, because visitorship is an aspect of that funding. There are some challenges to applying that to the neighborhood park system. The main reason is that in the regional park system, what we're doing is we put people to stand at park entries and count entrances to the park. People who enter the park are counted, and then we can statistically look at the entire system through that. Neighborhood parks are inherently permeable. Like, where would be the entry of a particular park, right? So, and then you have the risk of, if you do like an hourly count or a every 2-hour count, you may capture the same people on the same equipment. So we've actually been exploring this for years. It's very statistically challenging to do a neighborhood park count. There's been a couple of tests of this in our system. One by an outside group, the RAND Foundation, which did a national neighborhood park survey. We are continuing to look for internal funding to roll out a more robust neighborhood park count system. The two barriers are paying for people to be in the parks to do that, and the systematization that we have across our system in order to collect accurate data. We piloted last summer a way of doing that using recreation staff that are in the buildings already. We're testing to see if that's a viable way to go forward. The problem with it is that if the rec center buildings open at 3 p.m., we have missed the entire morning, and in often cases, we've missed Sunday because we're closed on Sunday. So the short answer to your question is, we know it's a huge data gap. We've been working to try to find a way to get better basic user demographic data in our parks. It's an ongoing challenge.
John?
Thank you. Hi, Adam. It's nice to, I won't say see you again because I don't see you, but I hear you.
Do others see me?
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, I don't know why I'm not seeing you, but I don't see you, but I hear you. So that's good enough. I just wanted to, this has been an ongoing thing that I know you're aware of, that we've commented on, and I think somewhere in your information you may have addressed this, but I wanted to bring it up here. At some point during this process, we'll be able to see how much the park board has requested for each of the coming 6 years of the current budget, capital budget. And you know, as I'm sure you're aware, our comment in the past has been that the park board requests are too close to the actual amount of money that you're going to receive. So effectively, CLIC is not actually making any choices about what should or should not be funded because you have barely enough projects to meet the amount of funding that you're actually going to get. So the first part of the question is, have you submitted more funding requests than you're actually going to receive by a meaningful amount this year? And if not, why not?
Thank you for the question. We have not submitted additional funding request beyond what is exactly authorized under the NPP 20 agreement between the city and the park board. I spent quite a bit of time in my video presentation this year, and in the PowerPoint presentation, which you might have also received, actually answering the question of why. And I think the sort of Cliff's notes to that question are that there's really three things that prevent us from doing that. Prevent me, in large part as staff, from over submitting for projects. The ordinance language in the NPP 20 ordinance and agreement between the city and the park board does set the limit of what we're going to receive in funding. And so it is that limit that leads to the creation of the park board CIP. And I need to have a balanced CIP. I need to have a balanced park board CIP. So those are the numbers that I'm working from. And then that's what gets submitted to CLIC. In addition, and here's the sort of weirdness sometimes of the relationship between the park board and the city, is that we actually are on a different CIP timeline than the city is. So I cannot create my own 2023 to 2028 CIP until I update the park board's equity metrics, and much of that data is not available until July. So I'm actually submitting to you now the projects that were authorized in the park board's last year CIP, which is why my 2028, the outmost year, is always an estimate. I don't have an approved 2028 yet because of that timing offset. And lastly, it's really the Board of Park Commissioners that provides me as staff the authorization to request money from you. And the most recent authorization that I have is that balanced CIP, which for us is the 2022 to 2027, is we're a year behind you. So though I totally appreciate and I understand CLIC's desire to want to weigh in and look at these projects and weigh them against each other. Currently, logistically, I simply cannot oversubmit financially because of the ordinance and because of the timing and because my Board of Commissioners has to authorize what I provide to you.
So if I could just follow up quickly on that, and then I'll done here. This might be more comment than question, but if you want to respond to it, feel free. I guess I would view that as not the correct interpretation of that ordinance. Streets is also part of that ordinance, and Public Works gives us way more streets projects than could possibly be funded in a given year. And maybe I think that what happens is we're effectively being asked to be a rubber stamp, and I'm not suggesting intention there. I'm just saying effectively that's what happens. I think if this were thought about differently in terms of being, instead of presenting to us a neat and tidy, all set budget, if there was a way to work this into your workflow so that we're advisory, right? You can do whatever you want, so can the city, but oversubmit to us, get our input, and then go ahead and come up with your balanced CIP that you present to the park board after that fact. That's, to me, how this ought to be working. Thank you.
I would, if I might, Chair Strand.
Yes, Adam.
The other item that that I should add to the mix is that also by ordinance, the projects that go into the CIP for the park board are selected under our equity metrics. I think that that the comment about changing the workflow does make sense, so that the CLIC becomes advisory in the development of the park board CIP is a possibility. But I think there's a concern that projects would be picked that actually don't follow then the equity metric, because I sort of already know once we do the equity metrics update every year, that predetermines what projects I'm going to send to my board. And if those differ from CLIC's recommendations, then it still doesn't give you the opportunity to advise on the differences between those projects on their relative merits. So the equity ordinance is another piece that I think makes this challenging. But I think the workflow and the timing comment is a good one. It's something that I will take to heart and look at for our next cycle. I appreciate that idea.
And I'm happy to talk more about this offline. Thank you.
And next we'll go to Katrina Stratton, and then I'll just note that I have another meeting at 1. So Vice Chair Bridges will be handling the speaker queue after that.
Hi, Adam. I'm Katrina. I have had the opportunity to participate in a couple Falwell, North Minneapolis park projects. And you do a really, really, really good job. But now being involved in CLIC and looking at the equity through this through an equity lens, I'm kind of, I understand how you judge assets, but if a park, you know, I've lived in a couple places in the city, so let's go back 40 years, and the parks in South Minneapolis say, and these are just examples because I know I'm not going to explain myself well, but I'm hoping Amity will speak up after this and help me out here. But if somebody has a bunch of assets and then you have to spend money going forward in the future to keep those assets up to par, that community that had the assets is still benefiting the most because they had the assets. Now in North, the assets weren't there, and so money still needs to be used and taken away out of the whole park board budget to maintain assets in South. So to me, it's kind of like it keeps this cycle of institutional racism going because you already have these assets you need to maintain, and the assets were never in one place. Now they're being put. Am I making sense? So part of the equity, your equity lens is maintaining assets, correct? So, but the assets weren't up here, for instance. So a big chunk of the money and part of through the equity lens is being used to maintain assets. Okay, so that's just, okay, so help me with that. So for instance, this is what I'm thinking. And this is just kind of an extreme example, but say for instance, because of the last 100 years of Minneapolis history, we didn't put any money at all into parks where there were medium to higher level incomes. And so for the next 20 years, all of the money went into the areas where there's low to, lower incomes. And the parks in South Minneapolis that had those assets would suffer, right? But think about using the whole park budget for the next 10 years, just doing things in lower income neighborhoods and how much more could be done. Help me here.
Sure. So maybe I'll share kind of a couple things, and if I don't quite get to what you're asking, then Chair Strand can perhaps allow a follow-up. So if we talk about the longevity of existence of assets in parks, let's say there's a park that has had a playground for 100 years versus a park where we just built one 5 years ago. Clearly the park with the playground that's been there for 100 years, that playground's probably been replaced, 6 times, plus all the maintenance in between. So that park has had more money invested in it over the 100 years of the park board. That reality doesn't actually correlate to race or income in the city, because some of our oldest parks and oldest assets are scattered around the city in a pretty haphazard way. So for instance, though parks, some of our smaller north side parks, like Cleveland and Willard, did come online later, the 3 big ones on the north side, Falwell, Farview, and North Commons, were some of our earliest parks. So there isn't a direct correlation between the sort of date of inception of a park and the neighborhood demographic that it is in.
Okay, that's really great.
Yep.
Okay, so I didn't know that because I haven't been here for 100 years.
And part of the story, and I think I just use the north side as an example because you seem familiar with it. Part of that story has to do with a process that came online in the early 1900s through the Elwell law, which was a special assessment on communities in order to build their own parks. So on the north side, you have those 3 big parks, pretty much. Maybe Harrison, you count a 4th. But all the other parks are much smaller and often don't occupy entire blocks. It's because those neighborhoods at that time could not afford to buy those entire parks. Whereas in the South and Southwest, when you look at Pershing and Linden Hills, they're all nice big squares, right? But what that is it's a timeline of the middle of the development of the park system. You had big parks scattered throughout, and then you started to fill in with smaller neighborhood parks. And that process was fairly inequitable because of the Elwell law. So that's just sort of curiosity for everyone's sake. And this is written up actually in our comprehensive plan, so you can read about it more. I will say in our equity metrics, we are looking back at least the last 15 years, which is what we can reliably track. And we are investing in those parks that have not had investment in the last 15 years. So we're making sure that we're touching the parks where there has been underinvestment in our system as one of our equity metrics, as well as looking at asset condition and asset longevity, which are 2 of our other equity metrics. I don't know if I got to enough there or if you want to follow up.
No, I think that's really, really great background. That's actually really interesting and answers a lot of questions. So to tag on to what Amity had asked, the community engagement, I know when I came, I live in the Falwell neighborhood, so we participated a lot when you were working on the Falwell Park. And then we went when you had all the parks together and it was farther down. So we went and so this is kind of 2 questions because it kind of surprised me. We were the only ones representing Falwell Park. I didn't. And so somebody in the mix in the room thought that Falwell Park shouldn't have the tennis courts. I'm sure, there was one person in particular in the neighborhood that fought really hard for those tennis courts. And so this is kind of 2-pronged, is that people involved, the community engagement, I know how difficult it is in my neighborhood to engage the community. And when we went to the community engagement opportunities, the people that showed up did not look like did not look like the residents in Falwell neighborhood, right? There were a higher percentage of white people that had input, older people, because it's not like we have anything else to do. But how do you get the community engagement to look like the neighborhood that park represents?
Yeah, it's a good question. It is something that we struggle with, and we've tried to improve practices over time. I am certainly not going to claim perfection in every or any case. But a couple things that I'll point out is, number one, I think, Trina, I do believe I remember you from the North Service Area Master Plan. I think we had some conversations about Falwell and other parks, so it's good to see you again. Those organized events, the kind of big open houses, the traditional evening meeting that you may have attended, That's not all that we do. So there was other engagement taking place that you may not have seen. We also would have set up shop for an afternoon in the gym at Falwell, which gives us a demographic that definitely skews younger for starters, and also maybe more representative racially of the neighborhood around that park. So we're doing a broad brush effort, and it's not just those open houses that guide our decision making. We're balancing that with a lot of other events that we do a lot of pop-ins. You know, we'll show up at the community festivals, at the open streets, we just kind of try to be everywhere. But the other thing we do from a policy standpoint is at the beginning of each project, we write a community engagement plan that on day one looks at the demographics around a park that we are working in. And it also sets a milestone in our project, at which time we reflect back on the engagement and decide whether we can proceed because we've succeeded in meeting our milestones or not. And in fact, recently with the Cedar Isles Master Plan, very different demographic, admittedly, but with our Cedar and Isles Master Plan, we actually, when we reached a milestone, we had not succeeded in engaging beyond a very white homeowner type of person. So we actually extended our engagement timeline another 6 months in order to capture additional voices.
Okay.
So we put the project on hold. That was opposed by the nearby community, but we did it anyways in order to do another round of engagement. Because when we did that assessment, that mid-project assessment, we hadn't met our goals yet. So those techniques that I'm sharing with you are part of a racial equity toolkit that we have customized and embedded into our community engagement plans that we write for every project. So the principles of a racial equity toolkit include doing a demographic analysis on the front end, setting up milestones on the back end where you evaluate it, and then circling back around if you didn't hit your goals.
Okay.
And so we do that for basically every project. We write a community engagement plan for every project, and it embeds that technique. Again, not saying that we're perfect. It's not what I'm claiming, but I think we're trying to continue to move the needle, and we are always open to additional ideas to push the engagement that we do.
No, you guys do a really good job, but I'll probably send you an email on something else that I want to talk to you about, but thank you very much. It was really helpful.
Dan Miller.
Okay, good afternoon, Mr. Evans, and thank you very much for that presentation that you put on. It was very detailed and very helpful, and I'll have to review it a few more times. I have 3 questions, but I thought I might just ask one question and then let it go back to the group, and as it cycles through other people, I'll ask the other ones when there's a chance. Something that's come up periodically within CLIC is looking at the different CBRs and taking a look at the project details about, the level of need, the department of priority. It's basically the first paragraph on the project details thing, and perhaps some as to on the project location and the priority year of bond authorization amounts. And I guess it's come up. I've thought about doing this for myself, but I think other people have brought it up, where if we had just a simple spreadsheet that just, had the project name and the, start date and the ongoing, whether it's an ongoing program, yes or no, and just the stuff that's there, but it's just in a concise sheet that we could go through and just skim it, would be helpful. I was wondering if that's something that you could put together with some ease, or if it would be difficult to do.
Yeah. So Dan, when I build all these CPR requests, I kind of have that spreadsheet. It's not exactly that simple, but in order, I have a prioritization list because I have to make my priorities and have to look at all the projects together. So what you're asking for is kind of what I'm using in order to then split it up into all these different projects. If that's something that you'd like me to pull together, maybe through the committee or through Neil Younghans, you can say exactly kind of what data points you want to see, like what columns on the spreadsheet, and I can pull that together. But of course, you know, operationally, I don't know if that's something that that the finance staff. I'm going to pause because I'm actually seeing Neil's hand raising, so maybe I'll just pause there.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I think we could put together something like that. I think we'd have to talk more details what it is, because there are I think 140 CBRs this year. So I think if we wanted to put something together, I think we'd want to take only one pass at putting together like a larger spreadsheet. So I think I have to get some more details. So maybe you and me, and then maybe like we could talk with Jeff and Willie about maybe some type of analysis or spreadsheet that you guys would want.
Certainly, I'll put something together for you, Neil, and send it through. And that's my end of the first question. Thank you, Mr. Arvidsson.
Eric, Don, and then Katie.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Arvidsson. So I have an easy question and then a question that might be really easy. The first question has to do with the diseased trees budget. So you consistently hold that flat going out to the year into 2028. Is that just would that clear the this sounds awful, the backlog, or is there anything more interesting to that budget than simply $800,000 a year? So that's an easy question. The other question, which you can run on your other processor, is Upper Harbor Terminal. 19.5 acres of Upper Harbor Terminal work, and I don't know where to find it in your CBRs. Is that simply not going to be part of your budget into the future, or are you providing for that project elsewhere?
Sure. Yeah, thank you. Both of those are fairly easy questions, but important ones. We actually increased the Park DT program this year from 300 to 800. So it historically has been 300, and so that was increased. So we are recognizing a greater need. With regard to Upper Harbor Terminal, is within a regional park area. It is within the Above the Falls Regional Park. And we actually are essentially barred from spending NPP 20 money in the regional parks. And we, by practice, do not spend local capital tax levy for capital improvement in the regional parks. So you don't see it in your CBR. However, the park board is allocating a full $6 million match to the $6 million state bond for parks for that project, for the first phase of implementation. It just doesn't, it's not local money, if that makes sense. And the big reason that we do not invest local tax dollars into the regional park system is because the state consistently underfunds its obligation to the regional park system and has done so since 1974. It is not on the local taxpayers of Minneapolis to make up a statutory failing by the state. The state, for instance, is required by statute to fund 40% of the maintenance of the regional park system. That number is currently at about a 10% reimbursement. It has been slightly higher, but it has also been lower. That maintenance burden does go directly on the taxpayers of Minneapolis through the park board budget. So we're not very inclined to spend additional taxpayer capital in the regional park system.
Great, that helps a lot. So the last sentence is, in other words, spending on the Upper Harbor Terminal park would not come out of the capital budget, but out of your operating budget.
For maintenance and operations, but the capital improvements does come out of our capital budget, but not the local city portion. It comes out of our regional state allocations that we get.
Got
And
it.
those are dollars that you don't see. I can make that. I mean, those dollars are in our CIP, so they're visible to everyone, but they don't run through a CBR.
Great. Thank you very much. Right.
Sure.
John, Katie, and then Neil. John?
Thank you. So with my last question and perhaps some of these, I know I'm asking things that in some cases you've addressed in the video. And so I appreciate your indulgence on that. Part of that is because I think some of these issues are important to highlight and flesh out in the full committee meeting. So with that, this question won't surprise you, Adam, from my history. There's a couple of projects that have some fairly large outstanding bond authorizations. So I was hoping you could quickly address them. There's only 4 that I found where there was a meaningful number. That's PRK 2, PRK 38, and then CP and RP.
Yep. Well, sorry, I'm just getting some spreadsheets up here in front of me. My mouse is suddenly acting very weird. Yes, I'll start with PRK 38, which is Sibley Park, which is also likely to undergo a name change for those of you whose skin crawls at the name of Sibley Park. Sibley had an allocation under the old non-equity CIP. And that allocation was large enough that it was given the PRK 38 project. So now Sibley has come into the CIP again as an equity project. So we're using that same number for 2 different phases of implementation of Sibley. The first phase will be under construction later this fall, and that will expend the entirety of that unspent bond. So that's where that project is. We are finishing community engagement as we speak, and will be under construction in the fall. PRK 02 is the Playground Rehabilitation Program. Again, we tend to be running realistically, and this is the case of the PRK CP also, which is all the implementation projects that aren't as high as $1 million. We tend to be running basically about exactly 1 year behind at the moment. And the reason I say 1 year behind is that you're seeing a lot of 2021 money that has not been expended. When we initiate a project in 2021, under the best case scenario, that project would go under construction in 2022, largely because of the amount of community engagement we must do, which takes the better part of a year. And then we want to be bidding in winter, not like putting things out for bid in the fall. So in the best case scenario, those monies would be expended in 2022. So if you're seeing them now under the 2023 request, we're basically about 1 year behind. And there's a couple of outliers that that sit in there that have been a little bit problematic for us, that are sort of gumming up the works, shall I say. So for instance, in the Park CP project, there's a splash pad at Victory Park, which we've bid that project multiple times and have not been able to get competitive bids. It's been delayed for multiple years now, and it's not an insignificant investment that's kind of weighing that down. We also are simply, number one, still kind of recovering from the pandemic in terms of community engagement. It slowed community engagement on projects way down and made them take longer. And then the other piece I will note is that over the past 4 years, the number of planning staff in the planning division has been cut for budget reasons. And so we have fewer people to implement the projects. And meanwhile, the project numbers have not gone down. In terms of the Park RP, the rehabilitation one, let me click a different thing here and give some insight on that. The Park RP is looks like the unspent is just about $1 million. And the biggest chunk of that that's remaining unspent is the money that's designated for our operations facilities across our system. We're in the midst of creating an operations facilities master plan, which is a totally unsexy document that we need to do in order to figure out how we're gonna like house the people that operate the system and the stuff and the equipment and all of that. Once that is done, we expect that that operations rehab money is going to be plowed pretty immediately into the places with the greatest need. The question is that we do have some older, smaller operations facilities that we may decommission. So spending money on them now wouldn't be responsible. Once that operations facilities plan is done, this rehab money gets spent pretty quickly because there's not really much community engagement. We do some informed level community engagement when we're replacing those things, but those projects roll out pretty quickly. So that's some general insight. I could take specific questions if you want.
So just a quick follow up on that. Thank you. I always appreciate that you give substantive answers that help explain this stuff. I don't think we wouldn't be doing our job responsibly if we didn't at least check in on these things. You know, some of it I understand. It's just the nature of how this stuff works. And I asked this of Arta an hour ago, and I think the same may apply here. I just wonder if there's no way that CLIC can work with you in finance to figure out if there's a better way to do the actual authorizing of this stuff, so you're not at risk of losing any of your funding. You still get the allocations you need. We just match the timing of the need better to the authorizing of the bonds.
That's sort of beyond my financial knowledge. We're already at the limit of my financial knowledge, to be totally honest. So I think it's a conversation that could be had. I would need a lot of help and guidance on that.
Thanks, Adam. Katie, and then Neil, and then Rich.
Yeah, thanks. I have a question about that stemmed actually from the Loring Park project. Just there, looked at the master plan, noted that there was, even though it is a major pass through for cyclists and for walkers for our pedestrians moving from Southwest Minneapolis to downtown, there wasn't a lot of detail on how do you assess pavement condition for non-roads. I saw in there that you have expected useful life for buildings, play areas, courts, athletic fields, but I didn't see pavement on there. Could you speak to that?
Sure, I sure can. Under the NPP 20 ordinance, we're required to look at asset condition and longevity and value of 5 major assets in the parks. And those are courts, athletic fields, buildings, aquatics, and play areas. However, there are many more kinds of amenities in parks, the so-called small amenities that still mean a lot to a lot of people. We do have some rehabilitation funds that specifically address some of those amenities. Like we have a sidewalk and pavement rehabilitation fund. So at the beginning of NPP 20, probably back in 2019, toward the beginning, we actually did a comprehensive pavement condition index of our system, of the neighborhood system. And then we began rolling out rehabilitation projects all across the system for kind of the worst pavement areas. So in 19 and 20 and 21, there was, in collaboration with the city's sidewalk repair program, the park board also used rehabilitation funds to repair lots of sidewalks, lots of trails in our parks. And we continue to do that on a rolling basis through that particular rehabilitation fund. As we get things up to snuff, that pavement rehabilitation fund is starting to turn toward looking at our courts, which is also an amenity that are in pretty bad shape across our system overall. So that's the sort of neighborhood park pavement condition index. In the regional park, it works a little bit differently. But I guess the simple answer to the question is, yes, we've done pavement assessments and we have addressed most of the worst facilities in most of the worst trail and sidewalk segments in our system already.
It would be awesome to, and I don't want to go down a rabbit hole and request a lot of data, but to get a better sense of that prioritization, just reflecting on areas that I see of need, and I'm kind of shocked that you're saying that you're almost to the end of that, and it's kind of surprised that some areas haven't been addressed. So maybe that's a conversation for offline.
Yeah, no, let me ask our asset management group about the ease of transmitting that pavement condition index data, and I can reconnect on that. I'm just I don't deal directly with that data, so I don't know the exact state that it's in. But let me look into it.
Awesome, thank you.
Neil?
So two things. One, just like a time check here, as I know we're trying to do a breakout session for the Human Development Task Force soon. But also, I was just holding place for Scott Engel because it looks like he was having some technical difficulties.
Okay.
Yeah, hello.
Good, Scott.
Yeah, Adam, I'm very interested in the Americans with Disabilities Act, ADA law, and how we've seen that Public Works, for example, is really decades and decades behind in implementing it, and their capital requests are at the pace they're coming to us. It's going to be 30, 40 years or more before they address these issues. I'm curious, is there any of this ADA data that gets as part of the equity measurements? And it seems like the park board is doing a reasonably good job of kind of catching up on the ADA stuff. I have noticed the improved trails, for example, and accessible restrooms, some of that stuff in recent years. Do you have a sense? Is the park board going to catch up on this stuff in 10 years, 20 years, or is it unforeseen?
Yeah, fair question. I couldn't say right now whether we have a date for catching up on everything that's considered in our ADA transition plan. So we do have an ADA transition plan that does itemize every ADA issue across our system. For parks, it can be a little weird because there's technically no ADA requirements for trails, and we have a lot of trails. So we try to still deal with it, even though there's technically no requirement. But we do have one of our 10 rehabilitation funds in the Park RP project does allocate about $800,000 a year specifically to ADA only projects. In addition, I think you can assume that almost every single one of our capital projects across the CVR is going to make an ADA improvement. So if we replace an old playground, we will be updating that playground itself to current or exceeding current ADA guidelines, in addition to often the walkways and trails and pedestrian ramps that provide access to that playground. Same with wading pools. Every time we do a wading pool, the wading pool will have a 0 depth entry, which makes it ADA compliant and frankly user-friendly for everybody. The specific ADA improvements rehabilitation category, we have been primarily using on building entrances and restrooms. So we've been thinking about largely the accessible route from a parking lot all the way into the building and to the restroom. And that varies in each building that we look at. But I think the improvements that you've seen and have cited in your question, specifically with regard to restrooms, that's been a particular focus for us. But I'm sorry, I can't, not being the park board's ADA coordinator, I can't tell you if there is a potential timeline for when things would be so to speak, complete.
Well, I think maybe that's where I'm going with this. I've come to learn that ADA transition plans are some document that people fill out and then they don't go back to them. So I may be asking you to go back to it and ask your staff at the park board to go back to it and compare what is said in this document that's probably gathering dust, and try to figure that out. And I think that would be helpful information in future CBRs to say, we are actually catching up on this. All our restrooms are accessible. I mean, that would be something that would be relatively easy to measure, right? You should be able to count that. Same thing with, if you can't get in the front door of a building, which I know of a couple recreation centers, they're still not accessible because of the weird doors. I mean, if you're not getting to that for 20 years, that seems ridiculous.
I think that's a fair point. That's something I can look into. And I do want to say that our ADA transition plan isn't gathering dust on a shelf. Every time a capital project launches, so if we look at CBR, PRK 042, when that project launches in that park, the project manager goes and pulls all the ADA items for that park and tries to figure out how many of them they can check off as a part of their capital project. So we're using that ADA transition plan on a project by project basis, like all the time. Every project managers are always using it.
So, and just one last comment. You guys are always, or your presentations are always just amazing. So I think somebody said this, you guys you're the gold standards. So if I'm asking a tough question, it's only because I don't think even Public Works is prepared to answer anything this complex. So thank you.
Thank you for that comment. I appreciate it.
We got two more, and then we can do our breakout room. Rich, and then Dan.
Hello, Adam. So I watched your presentations and have been interested in the issue of the relationship between CLIC and the Parks Board for the funding. I pretty much can't say I would disagree with anything that I saw. I seem to feel like I understand the process and the limitations we're working with. But what I haven't heard anybody really say today is, what do you guys want from CLIC? I forgot who it was, but somebody used the word rubber stamp earlier. And that's the feeling that I had from the presentation and the proposals. So if there's, anything at all you can ask to really justify giving rankings and attention. If everything's said and done and it's all wrapped up, good for me. I'm happy to accept that. I have no issues with any of the details, but I would like to know, if I'm going to be spending time on this, what is it you can do with it? What is it you want out of it?
Yeah, thank you for that question, Rich. And I hope that the group today and the group that I've been speaking to for a bunch of years now can both see that though there are some constraints with what the relationship between the park board and the city and CLIC are, that I still really honor and appreciate the knowledge and the ideas that this group brings forward. So in the past, things that the park board does as standard practice now came directly from CLIC. And most notably, the way that we sort of standardize funding in parks so that we're not picking random numbers out of a hat, so that similar parks are getting the similar allocations, that came from CLIC asking me questions about how do you decide how much money a park is getting. And you know what, the first year I didn't have a good answer. And the next year I try to come back with a better answer. So what I appreciate from CLIC, and I guess if I could be so bold, what I would like from CLIC is some real systems change thinking. It may not be possible in this context for you to say we want project A over project B. But the question of how do they come into CLIC? How do they come into the CIP? What are the numbers? What are we doing right? What could we improve on? The systems thinking that allows me to change practice as I develop my CIP and as I put together my CBRs, that's really helpful. And today I've already got a few things. Jeff Bernstein talked about, like, is there a way that the timing that I can think differently about the timing so that it is maybe a little more advisory. I'm willing to look at that. The comment that just came in about having a clear vision for when are we going to get through all of the restrooms and making them ADA accessible? And if it's taking too long, maybe we need to put more rehab money into that category. That's super helpful. So I think there's some systems change things that if you have that stuff, if there's still an open question about how exactly we're doing something, that's where I want to answer the tough questions. And if I don't have an answer, like I didn't have an answer about this ADA question earlier, that always leaves in my mind like, how do we get that answer? And then how does it change our practice? So that's kind of where I am. And it's why I want to be as transparent as possible, because the more you know about how our system works, the more I think you can insert yourselves into creating some systems change at the park board and in the relationship between the park board and the CBR.
Okay, thank you. That's helpful.
And Miller.
Okay, do you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you. This is perhaps a little bit out of the CLIC's purview, but in your presentation, Adam, you had mentioned 6.5 to 10.5 annually going into regional parks and trails. And I know that doesn't come before CLIC, but it's a good amount, and it'd be interesting to know in some version how the public understands what is getting work done within that. It would just be interesting to have some format to do that. And I just wanted to compliment the rehabilitation program, or that worked on the rehabilitation of the trails this past fall. That took care of much of Victory Memorial Drive and down by the lakes, down by Benemakoska, and I think that was really a smart thing to try to get at some of these trails before they're just totally toast, and to be able to develop a program that actually the city this year is implementing something similar in a CPR. So thank you for doing that. And the question is, how can we learn more about what is getting spent annually on regional parks and trails?
Yeah, I can give a real quick kind of regional park primer, and if you want more, we can have coffee sometime. So the capital money for the regional parks comes from the state and the Met Council through three basic sources. We get money from the constitutional amendment, the tax constitutional amendment. We get money from the lottery, and we get money from state and regional bonding. So the state bonds for regional parks, and the Met Council matches that every other year. The amount we get is determined by a formula written into state statute that decides how that money is all divvied up between the 10 different agencies that are responsible for the regional park system. Those 10 so-called implementing agencies are basically us and the city of St. Paul and a bunch of the metro counties and Three Rivers Park District. So we get divvied up depending on our usership, the amount of acreage we have. So there's a whole formula. Once we know how much money we have, the park board actually we use an equity metric for regional parks, similar to but different than the one for neighborhood. We use an equity metric that we've written into our own ordinances in order to select which regional parks will have investment. And then once a park is in our CIP, we do a very similar process like we do to neighborhood parks. We go out, we engage the community. We first ask, what things should we implement based on the master plan? And then we implement those projects. So our engagement process is very similar to what we do in the neighborhood parks. The only main substantive difference in terms of community engagement is that each regional park needs to have its own master plan in order to be able to even get funding. So we are regularly updating regional park master plans. We do those on a one-by-one basis, or sometimes parts of parks. Right now, we're engaged in doing a master plan for Cedar Lake and Lake of the Isles, which are a portion of the Minneapolis Chain of Lakes Regional Park. But we're doing those in pieces because it would be an overwhelming task to do that by itself. Once that master plan is adopted, then those lakes would be eligible for those funding sources that I shared before. So that's the Super Nickel Tour Regional Parks Funding 101.
Okay, we have one more question from Katie. Katie will be the last question so that we can have our breakout session. Katie?
Yeah, I have a question about the Parkway Paving Program. In there, the map indicates that essentially the mall in Uptown is scheduled for paving in 25 to 2028. I just want to clarify. So that was part of the Southwest Service Area Master Plan. There won't just be a repaving as is. It will be, I mean, depending upon the amount of funding, of course, but there will be steps taken to actually implement the master plan, correct, in that place?
Yeah, that's correct. We're actually doing it now. The county and city both have major projects in the mall, some utility work under the mall, and the county is going to be underway now. I think they've got I think they've got a big sanitary under there that they're redoing. And the county will be restoring the condition to the master plan condition, not rebuilding the road. So if you're seeing the paving on there, is that on the city's capital map? Yeah. So it would probably be a repaving of essentially the roadways that remain after this county project actually implements a portion of our master plan. So I should just say yes. Okay. and that it's happening actually really soon, because the county's project will eliminate a portion of those roadways per the master plan and will not restore them. They will rebuild what our master plan says to do.
Thank you.
Adam, thank you for your time. We appreciate it as always. The park does a great job in their presentation, so thank you.
Thank you so much, Willie. Thanks everybody for your time, for your ongoing service. You know, Mary said it too, but you have a big job and a hard job, and I know the relationship with the park board is a little weird. It's different than with the other city departments, but I appreciate all the thinking that comes out of this group. I really do, and we take it to heart, and we do make process changes as we go along. So I'm looking forward to exploring some of the things that were raised up today as possible process changes. And I wish you all the best of luck as you take on the difficult job of working through the budget. So thank you so much for your time and service.
Thank you. Okay. With that, we have completed all items on the agenda for this meeting, with the exception of the task force breakout rooms. Members of the Human Development Task Force remain in this meeting, and members of the Transportation Task Force should be automatically redirected to a breakout room on Teams. If you get disconnected, please rejoin the main meeting and staff will get you to the correct breakout room. I will ask members and staff if there are any other matters to come before this meeting. Neil, anything else?
That's it from staff.
If not, and without any objection, I will declare this meeting adjourned at the conclusion of the task force breakout room. Our next meeting will be Wednesday, April the 20th. Thank you to everyone. Neil, it's yours.
All right. I think we're getting moved to other meetings right now.
Willie, will you be joining the Human Development Task Force this year, or are you switching off with Jeff?
No, you'll be stuck with me. Sorry, Eric.
Oh, we're blessed. Okay, task force. Why don't we wait here until I believe Neil's going to be returning to join us?
Don, you going to be with us this year?
No, I think you put me in the wrong room.
Oh.
There you go. Neil? You got me in the wrong room.
There we go.
He's leaving. Okay.
I too, I think I'm supposed to be over in transportation.
Okay, who just spoke?
Matt.
Oh, Matt. Hi, Matt.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thanks.
Where's Neil?
Well, this is Justin. Matt, you initially were sent over there, and some members are coming back into the main room. Do you have an option to join the open breakout room? You are
I
currently
did. It looked
assigned
like
to
I was transitioned, but then when I just reappeared back here. I don't think I did anything to cause that, but maybe I hit a button that I wasn't supposed to.
I tried to join the transportation room, but just saw a blank screen, like a black screen. So if you can send me over there again.
Whatever Amity is asking for, me too.
It's our first day doing this, so we're working out things.
I was in the transportation breakout room, but I couldn't see anybody and I couldn't say anything. It was disconcerting.
It was literally just a black screen. I could hear people.
Yes.
And I apologize because my meeting is saying that my browser no longer works with meeting. I haven't changed anything. So we'll have to see what happens here.
Matt's back over here. Amity's back over here. Ria's back over here. So
Willie, am I still here?
I heard your voice, but I don't see you.
I see you, Katrina.
Yes, you're
Oh,
still
I
here.
see you now, Katrina. You're still here.
Okay.
See
What
Johnson,
a wild
Katrina.
existential question. Are we?
I mean, it really is. An existential
Am I
question.
here?
Like, am I here? Technically, we're somewhere. Oh, okay. Wait, who just
Amity
left?
left, Red came back, Amity. It's back and forth between those two.
Was Rita trying to get into a different? Rita, were you trying to go?
Yeah, I'm trying to go back to transportation, but I'm unsure how
Well,
to do that.
Risa, do you have an
Oh,
option
it's
to
Risa.
join the
Sorry,
room
I don't have
breakout?
my readers on.
It's okay. It's okay. One more time, please. Sorry.
Hey,
Justin.
Risa, the breakout room is open. You are assigned to it. Do you have an option in Teams to join the room?
So I don't see anything on my screen that says that I can do that or should do that. I'm looking through the settings.
Uh-oh, Amity's back.
Amity's back.
I love it.
There was a button that said join room, and I clicked that, and I could hear John Bernstein speaking, but couldn't see anybody, and I don't think he could hear me.
Oh dear.
Oh, wait, there's a, hopefully this will work.
See if that works.
See you
Bye.
soon. Hopefully.
Risa, you should have got the same prompt.
Okay, I did not get that prompt. Unless if there's somewhere special that it would show up, I'll look. But I just see, like right now, I just see all of the folks lined up at the bottom of this screen and, folks' faces. And the options that I have are the normal options, like turn your video on and off, open the share tray, open more options.
Sure. Risa, I'm going to keep troubleshooting to get you into that room. I'll defer to Eric if you want to start your breakout session.
Yeah, why don't we get started here? So welcome everyone back. If you're in the wrong room, just okay, great. We're able to get started here. So our task, and again, I want to recognize Willie Bridges is with us. He is the vice chair of the entire CLIC. So we're glad to have him with us to provide us with insights if we need extra help here. So our first task is going to be, as we did last year, to describe the ranges of scoring that we want to use on the various CBDs. Before we go there, CBRs, before we go there, did everyone have an opportunity, even if you haven't read them in great depth, to look at the requests, the CBRs? If you've had trouble accessing them or have not had a chance to try that link, just let us know and don't worry about it. We'll be able to circle back later. Okay, Justin, you're with us?
Yes.
Great,
Yes, I
great.
am.
So I'm going to follow the instructions that I got from Neil so that we are working at the same pace and the same direction that John is working. Okay, we don't have much time. Justin, what do we want to get done today to stay on track?
Yep, the goal is, as we've seen, Art in Public Places and Park Board CBRs presented, you've reviewed their presentations, and then had this Q&A session. The focus of Human Development Task Force is to look at the 2 art CBRs that are on your screen, and then we'll go through Park Board, and to give a recommended range from this task force, directing all members of CLIC on your suggestions for where they should score the project. So ultimately, we'll look at project priority, the level of need, and then contribution to city goals. And from this task force, you'll say, we recommend that members rate within this point range. Members are still allowed to score outside of that range. It's just strongly recommended by the task force that you stick within that recommendation. So what I have on the screen is Art 01 was previously submitted. So an X is marked on where this task force recommended last year that CLIC members put a rating. And then Art 02 is new, so we don't have last year's as a guide. And our recommendation to the task force chairs was to facilitate open conversation about, do you want to start with last year's as a benchmark and possibly modify it, see what that discussion is, and if it's pretty much consensus amongst the group, to just indicate that is what you want. I can make any adjustments on the screen, and then rather than having roll call votes on each of these individually, we'll just look for a motion and second at the end to accept all recommendations from this task force and submit those to the full body for consideration. If there's any that are kind of contentious or you're going back and forth on and you would like us to facilitate a roll call, we're happy to do that.
Great.
Make your screen a little bigger.
Yes. Great.
Better.
And okay, so I'm going to make a recommendation, not necessarily on this, but on our review today. We have probably 3 times as many CBRs as we did last year because of the way they split it up. So what I'd like to, let's see, I'd like to make a suggestion. This is not a motion. We'll open up for motion later. I would suggest that we take Art 01 and unless anyone would like to discuss it, we can continue to use the scoring that we did last year. Are there any, does anyone want to discuss Art 101, Art 01? Katrina.
Yeah, you know, after last year doing all of the investigation on where it came from and how it's going, Minneapolis is quite behind in art in public places because the mandatory, well, the budget. Anyway, we're way behind. Minneapolis likes to be in the top 10 of everything, and art in public places we are not. Also, the Harvard Business School did a review on why companies move to different cities, and art in public places happens to be a significant determination because it has a lot to do with culture. So I think we should move it up to significant. Actually, I think it's critical, but I know nobody will go along with that. So I'm willing to compromise on significant.
Okay, and would you like to talk to contribution to city goals at the same time?
Yeah, well, you know, that Minneapolis says it's like one of the leading cities in the country, and I mean, aren't public places, we're not. If you just look at the city statement, this is one area where I think Minneapolis kind of falls down.
Okay, let me open that to the floor. Anyone else would like to say something regarding Art 01? would, let me see, just say, okay, Jocelyn.
So I wouldn't disagree about moving the project priority to significant. But I would put the caveat that yes, Minnesota and Minneapolis likes to be at the top of all of the ranking, but it's top of all the ranking for those that, for white folks. I'm not sugarcoating this year. So so it's not so when it comes to every other representation, Minnesota falls short on a lot of things. I believe that art is important, and is definitely a boon. But I would also say, as we go further into conversation, that there may be other things that may be even more significant, and that should be a priority.
Okay, thank you, Jocelyn. Eamon.
Yeah, I just want to kind of also agree with what Jocelyn said of just being careful to realize that we're looking at these things with a closed universe of the amount of funds and resources that we're able to distribute. And I do think public art is important, but I do think that there's other things that we should consider that maybe can move the needle towards greater equity and greater influence in people's lives in other areas too. So just kind of keeping that holistic understanding. And I wouldn't oppose moving it to significant, but also would just want to kind of keep that understanding in place.
Great, thank you. Katrina, are you speaking again?
Yeah, if it's okay.
Yep.
You know, Mary does a really good job of, I think, in understanding that disparity issue by the way that she understands on really promoting the BIPOC community in the arts, and that making sure that they get the majority of the funding going forward. And I think because she has an understanding of what has happened in the past in Minneapolis, that she does a really great job of making sure that, from what I've seen, the majority of the funding going forward is for the BIPOC community. And then I'll shut up after now.
Okay, James.
Thanks.
Yep.
I have my video off here, but I think one of the things that was really helpful for me last year, being my first year on Click last year, you know, the thinking about these projects in relation to each other is my understanding of the rankings. You know, how do they relate to each other, and how does that relate to the whole budget? But I felt like we did a good job last year with the comments, and to me that really stood out. I mean, I'm learning still about this whole process, but the comments really are our main vehicle to, you know, if we can, influence what's going on with the budgets. But as far as the rankings, I think it's going to with the rankings isn't, in my understanding, the way that we can influence what's being done, you know, or proposed in general, or in relation to like our failings nationally. It more has to do just with, it's in relation to each other. But so I guess I would recommend that we just really focus this year on the comments, and keep in mind that the rankings really are about the budget and how all the projects relate to the use of the budget.
So I would like to agree with James here. I'm taking that off the chair hat. I believe a comment is in order here that expresses more than that places in context the art, as what Katrina was discussing. Art is a vehicle for accomplishing some of the equity goals we may have in the city, that corrects some of the historical as well as cultural inequities that have evolved over time. So could we have a couple of volunteers to prepare a comment to that effect? And we'll take this to the larger body when we reconvene as the click of the whole. But if you'd like to start on some language here, or at least some thoughts, I think it would be a good time to make a note to yourself. Okay, we don't need volunteers here. I think we can move on to the Upper Harbor Public Art. So as Mary was explaining, the Upper Harbor Public Art effort is an effort, it includes an effort to more widely address the the inequity, the equity issues that our city faces. That's partially historical, but also a product of our current activities. So I believe this gets a very high score on equity. Is there any discussion? Rich, please go ahead.
Just a quick question. I missed it in the presentation and somebody asked, but it wasn't clear. Does the funding for Art 02, is that included in the guaranteed funding for art all around? Was that already factored in? Or is this considered a new project that is competing with roads and buildings and other projects?
So please correct me if I'm wrong, anyone. My understanding is that this is a new project.
Yeah, and sorry to interject, but this is like above and beyond their normal 1.5% for the net debt bond. So this would be, I guess, like technically in competition with those other investments.
Okay, so our rankings for this actually will make a difference. A high ranking will assure that it gets funded, and a low ranking may actually exclude it for later years.
Correct.
Thank you.
Yep. Okay, so any further discussion? Otherwise, I'm going to ask for a proposal on project priority. Would anyone like to step up and make a proposal for the project priority?
Go ahead.
Amen.
Yeah.
Hi, yeah. I just kind of, in looking at the universe of art projects, I think that, and people feel free to, who have better understanding of this project, contradict me here. But this seems like kind of a better goal of accomplishing those equity kind of things that we'd like to accomplish through art projects. So I would just make a note that I think it would be nice to have this maybe a little bit higher than the other art project, just to kind of express that priority from us.
Take it. Would you like to turn that into a proposal? One is significant, the other critical. One important, the other significant. How would you like to couch that?
Yeah, I would probably defer to other people that have stronger opinions, but somewhere between significant and critical, one of those two.
Okay, Katrina.
So, Eamon, I'm just going to address you on this a little bit. So what's been happening with the Upper Harbor Terminal? I kind of haven't been paying attention the last 6 months, but it really is being pushed by local people that live really, really close to this area and the neighborhoods in this area to really be our, not just the north side, but like Lower and above, their neighborhood, like a neighborhood park. I know it's a regional park and it's a bigger project, but Eric, correct me if I'm wrong, but it's really, people are really looking at this as being ours, the north sides. So by combining it or making it more important than the Art 1, I said 01? Why am I saying 101? Because it's not a class. So the Art 01 is basically for the citywide. Upper Harbor Terminal, the way we're looking at it now is that it's just a north side project. I know people in the city aren't, but people in the area are. Am I correct, Eric?
Yeah, I think there are various, if I might, this taking off the chair hat, I think there are many perspectives. There are others who believe that this is a regional, this is intended to be a regional destination, a place where a reflection on underserved communities is broader than just the north side. So I think where you stand depends on where you sit, or where you sit depends on where you stand. So
yeah,
you know, I would say that we should look at this as something of greater benefit than to the north side, because I mean funding is one good example. The money they're talking about is from state bonding. So it's big money being brought in from outside of our neighborhood. So I can see, Eamon, your perspective. So I'm going to put the vice chair on this. Oh, she's raised her hands.
You didn't put me on the spot.
Yeah.
So I'm glad I preempted you, and as you were possibly about to put me on the spot.
Yeah.
I think to all the points that have been discussed, that, and especially after Mary gave her presentation, it's important to not, as Katrina said, Art 01 is citywide, and that the Upper Harbor Terminal is important enough to move it outside of being collapsed into that. And so I think, to Eamon's point, I was, as I was, before you all started to talk, I was going between significant and critical. And also listening to the argument of possibly making it higher than 01. I think that because there are already funds and that this is a conversation, that I'm fine with it being significant. I would argue that it is because of all the things, and as you said, where you sit, where you stand, that this is critical. This is future forward. So my vote, my recommendation would be to put it at project priority, critical, and a strong contribution to city goals.
Okay, thank you, Jocelyn. Any further discussion? And if I could circle back, Eamon, would that meet your needs?
Yeah, I would support that.
Okay, Katrina, would you support that?
Hell yes.
Okay, then unless I hear any objections, we'll go with that. So critical, and let's see, Justin, the Art 01 goes to from important to significant. Okay, if anyone sees has a disagreement with this, otherwise we're going to move on. Okay, let's move on to the park system. Yeah, make this really big. There we go. So we did not do the budget last year or in previous years to such great detail. You may have to flip back and forth to the CBRs if you don't know the specific project that's being called up here. Could we look, if you don't mind, Justin, just scroll right across and look at the project priorities for across the board from last year?
Absolutely. I think that's good to note. I believe all of them were strong contribution to city goals.
Right.
The first three were important.
Okay.
And then the remaining were all significant. We also have several new projects, as Adam mentioned, based on their new criteria. So all but the first three were significant, the first three were important, and all were strong contribution.
Okay, what I'm going to do is suggest we go through those that we ranked last year. But first, Rich LaRoe, please.
I have a suggestion here. Included in this spreadsheet, do we have the rankings as provided by the park itself? I believe they've ranked all of these, including the new ones. Can we just, maybe as a proposal, accept their rankings as they propose and either give them all the same, or, put the top one significant and the bottom one important or desirable, and just sort of draw the line. As we know from the discussion we just had, these all get funded anyway. There's no ranking we're going to give them that's going to make a difference. And I'm happy to accept the proposal as presented by the park board for those rankings.
So Katrina. Katrina?
Sorry, I
There you
agree with, I second what Rich says.
Okay, let me come at this, getting to the same end that Rich and Katrina proposed. Does anyone have any strong feelings that would not be consistent with what we did last year or with what the park board ranked? Going once? Thor.
Yep, Eric, I just want to add in because in diving into what might, I didn't look at all the details. I just went over it.
Yep.
If there possibly is one that needs a highlight, then maybe some comments could be added. I would agree with what people have proposed here. And then we can use our comments section if there's something that deals with equity, that we can highlight a park and say, please make sure that this park is getting the proper attention. So if that comes up, I think that'd be a good way to deal with highlighting and adding in our opinions on this.
Great idea. So I have a proposal here. Thor, I'm not cornering you here, but would you be interested in leading the development of that comment? That dives into greater detail in those instances where both generally in terms of the equity question, but also if anyone in this call or in the Human Development Task Force has views about any of these individual projects, that we flesh them out in a comment.
Yeah, I'm willing to participate in that.
Super.
Or lead it, however it needs to be done.
Lead is always great. Okay, so Justin, I think we're at the point where we vote this all up or down. Is that correct?
Essentially, if you want to determine that all of the park board projects are going to be at a certain project priority and contribution to state goals, we certainly can mark that up. We don't need to vote today if you don't want to. If you want to wait until you have your public grounds rankings, your fleet rankings, and water all of your projects and do a single vote, we certainly can do that. If you want to do a roll call on art and park board, we can facilitate that as well. We'll defer to you.
So we're not in the official meeting right now, so we don't need a roll call. Were there any of these projects that did not have a score that we did not rate in previous years? We need to cover those. There you go. Sibley.
Yeah. Eric?
Yes.
Can I interject for a second about
Sure.
the sheet? So I updated this, and since new projects were added to it, the ranking might not actually correspond what you did with the previous year because of the way that the like when you insert cells or move things around. I can't promise that it was the same from last year.
Okay, Rich.
Yes, each CBR in it contains a precise ranking that the park board presented. Does this sheet reflect that ranking?
Rich, this is Justin. No, it does not. So those rankings are on the CBRs. We don't incorporate that into this spreadsheet. This would be the task force determining what your recommended range is. If you want us to put together a complete list of how the park board ranked their projects, what my recommendation would be is to give staff time to prepare that for our next meeting.
Right.
As far as how we incorporate that into the spreadsheet, or if we just provide that and then you all determine if you want to modify the recommended ranges, we can walk through that at our next meeting. It is very transportation heavy. So I know as we're already a little bit over time, we certainly could take our task force time to come back and discuss the park board further with that information.
Yeah, I think that was the ask from the conversation a few minutes ago, that we take the park board ranks and we basically just reflect those on the sheet. And either, we can give a high and low, sort of that corresponds to their own recommended rankings.
I would suggest, this is Willie, I would suggest to you do what Justin is saying, because I think you got to look at neighborhoods, and I think they do look at what we are recommending, because there were certain neighborhoods last time that we talked about that didn't get service, and this year I noticed that he mentioned it a little bit. So I think it's what Justin is saying makes sense to come back and look at the park board.
Right. they've already done the work for us, so let's just
Right.
take that
Let's
as
just
a
look at it.
starting point.
Okay, why don't we move forward with that? Justin, could we get that list at the next meeting?
Yep, certainly.
Great. Anything, do we have anything more to do today, Justin?
Hey, Eric,
Yep.
just a minute.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Hey, Rich, you know, in their ranking, the rankings kind of go along, or the rankings go along like this. The Sibley one was 19 out of 22. Well, they don't have it planned for the budget until 2027. So the rankings kind of go along with where they've got the money to spend. So even if we put it at the same ranking, they're not going to be doing it until 2027. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, that's the reality is the rankings are really not going to make a large effect. And that I agreed with you and Thor to say, let's just make this easy on ourselves, flatten it out, and then save the comments for highlighting particular projects that just need a little more attention.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay, do we have consensus around that? Any objections? Okay, Willie and Justin, I believe we've concluded what we needed to do today. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yep. Yep. We have ranges for art, and we will circle back on park board next week.
Good. Without objection, let us conclude this meeting.
Just want to throw a thing in here.
Yes.
We have May 21st that we need people to sign up for the convention. So if you haven't signed up, please look at it and see if you can. We need about 3 or 4 people for the afternoon of this May 21st neighborhood community demand our table. So if any of you can do that, that would be much appreciated.
And just a reminder that if you're involved with any political parties, there's a state convention that weekend, so you might have a conflict if you're a convention delegate or participant. Okay, well, thank you, everyone. We'll see you next week. Have a great week.
Thanks, everyone. April 20th.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.